You're strapped into an ejection seat doing 400 knots, and the sky around you has turned into something out of a nightmare nobody could invent on purpose. Black puffs of flak are blooming everywhere you look, so thick that later you'll say it reminded you of pea gravel, because that's what it sounds like when the spent rounds run out of velocity and rattle off the bottom of your wings. 2 miles back, your flight leader just took a hit and went down. His wingman is limping home with a 4-foot hole punched through his wing. That leaves you and one other airplane alone over the most heavily defended patch of sky in North Vietnam. You have a decision to make, and you have about 4 seconds to make it. Every instinct, every ounce of training, every page of the flight manual says the same thing. The job is done. The strike force is inbound. Get out while you still can. Nobody would question you for it, and you've already done your part. Captain Merlin Deathlison didn't leave. He rolled his crippled jet back into the flak, found the missile site that had just killed his flight leader, and did it 4 more times. 10 minutes total, an eternity in a place where most pilots wouldn't risk 30 seconds. Merlin Hans Deathlison was born on June 29, 1934, on a farm outside Greenville, Iowa, a town so small it barely shows up on a map. He grew up in nearby Royal, Clay County, in the kind of place where everybody's business was everybody's business, and hard work wasn't a virtue, it was just Tuesday. He was sharp. He graduated Royal High School with honors in 1951, at 16 years old. 2 years ahead of most of his classmates. He spent 2 years at Iowa State before he decided college could wait and the Air Force couldn't. He joined in 1954, and here's the part that tells you something about him. He didn't walk in demanding to be a fighter pilot. He came up through the aviation cadet program, got his commission in 1955, and spent his first years in the Air Force as a navigator, not a pilot, flying C-124 Globemasters, massive lumber and cargo haulers out of Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. He plotted courses and read instruments in the back of a plane built to move freight, not fight wars, hauling engines and vehicles and mail across oceans while other young officers were chasing cockpit assignments. It wasn't glamorous. It was the job in front of him, and he did it, the same way he'd done chores before sunrise on a Clay County farm where the work didn't care whether you felt like doing it. Pilot training came later, and when it did, he moved fast. By the early 60s, he was flying F-100 Super Sabres with the 9th Tactical Fighter Squadron in Germany, part of the tripwire of American air power facing down the Soviets across the Iron Curtain. It was Cold War duty, not combat. Alert scrambles, low-level intercepts, the constant hum of a war that never quite started, but it taught him how to fly a fast jet on instinct, which is about to matter more than he could have known. In 1965, while still on active duty, he finished his college degree at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, majoring in business. The kind of detail that tells you this was a man who finished what he started, on his own schedule, without making a show of it. By 1966, he checked out of the F-105 Thunder Chief, the biggest single-seat fighter the Air Force had ever built, a jet so heavy and so fast at low altitude that pilots just called it the Thud. In October of that year, he landed at Tak Lee Royal Thai Air Force Base in Thailand, and he joined one of the strangest, most dangerous jobs in the entire war. He became a wild weasel. Here's what a wild weasel actually did, and why almost nobody wanted the assignment. North Vietnam's air defenses had grown into a 3-layer nightmare by 1967. Anti-aircraft guns thick enough to blacken the sky. Soviet-built SA-2 surface-to-air missiles that could reach up and pluck a jet out of level flight. And MiG-21 interceptors waiting to pounce on anything that got separated from the pack. Somebody had to go in first and find the missile sites before the bombers arrived. And the only way to find a SAM site was to get it to turn on its radar and shoot at you. That was the whole job, fly in ahead of everyone else and be the bait. The squadron's motto was blunt about it, first in, last out. The weasels would troll for SAMs. daring the North Vietnamese radar operators to light them up. The instant a sight did, the two-man crew in the back seat equipped F-105F, pilot up front, electronic warfare officer, or bear behind him, would fire a Shrike missile that rode the radar beam straight back to its source. Then the wingman, flying standard bomb-loaded thuds, would come in and finish the sight with cluster bombs and cannon fire. It required a level of coordination between two men in two cockpits that most fighter pilots never needed and never wanted. A kind of trust that either clicked immediately or got people killed. Deathlison's bear was Captain Kevin Mike Gilroy, and by March of 1967, the two of them had already flown more than 50 combat missions together into exactly this kind of airspace. We were the eyes and ears of that strike force, Deathlison said of the job years later. The SAM sites were there to protect it from our airstrikes. The strike force would be very vulnerable to the SAMs and anti-aircraft guns. Keeping them down was our job. On March 10th, the target those SAM sites were protecting was the Thai Nguyen Iron and Steel Works, 35 miles north of Hanoi, the single most important industrial target in North Vietnam. The plant produced close to 40% of the country's steel, the only mill of its kind in the nation, built with Chinese help a decade earlier. The commander of U.S. Pacific Command had asked Washington that January for permission to systematically flatten North Vietnam's military and industrial base, with Thai Nguyen as the head of the list. And for 2 years, political restrictions had kept it off the target list entirely. President Johnson finally approved the strike in late February. Then the monsoon took over, and the mission got scrubbed 8 separate times, waiting on a break in the weather. On March 10th, the skies finally cleared enough, and 72 American aircraft launched from 3 bases in Thailand to hit it. F-105s from Korat, more F-105s and the Wild Weasels from Takli, and F-4 Phantoms from Ubon flying cover against the MiGs. 4 Wild Weasels went in ahead of them, call sign Lincoln. Major David Everson led, with Captain Donald Luna in the back seat. Captain Bill Hoft flew his wing. Deathlison led the second element, with Gilroy behind him, and Major Kenneth Bell flew on his wing. All 6 men had flown this kind of mission dozens of times before. None of them had flown anything like what was waiting for them at Thai Nguyen. They refueled from tankers over Laos, crossed the Red River, and came down the backside of a ridgeline pilots called Thud Ridge. And even before they reached the target, the sky ahead told them everything. An earlier wave of bombers had already gone in, and Thai Nguyen was burning. There was absolutely no doubt about the target location, Bell said afterward. Thai Nguyen was ablaze with AAA fire, and a large column of black smoke covered the area. The defenses were ready, and Thai Nguyen was a boiling mushroom of ugly black flak. 96 separate gun positions ringed the target. SAM sites tracked the incoming weasels the moment they crossed 2 miles out. Everson went in first, diving through the flak, launching a Shrike at a SAM site he'd locked onto. Seconds later, his jet took a direct hit. He and Luna ejected, hit the ground, and were captured before they could do much more than get their bearings. The start of 6 years as prisoners of war that wouldn't end until the general repatriation of 1973. Hoft followed him into the same wall of fire and came out the other side with an 85mm shell hole punched clean through his left wing, just outside the landing gear. He nursed his crippled Thud north to an airfield in Thailand and put it down, but he was finished for the day. Gilroy, in the back seat of Deathlison's jet, would remember how the spent flak rounds sounded on the way down. A patter against the belly of the aircraft, like gravel thrown against a window. That left 2 aircraft over the most defended target in North Vietnam. Deathlison and Gilroy in the lead, Bell flying their wing. By every rule in the book, this was the moment to disengage. The lead element was down or damaged. The objective was compromised, and command doctrine gave them every justification to turn for Tak Ly. Deathlison studied the flak pattern instead, not looking for a way to avoid it, because there wasn't one, but looking for the places where it was thinnest. Then he rolled back in. Gilroy got a rough fix on the SAM radar from the back seat, and the two thuds punched through the barrage to press the attack, emerging on the other side riddled with holes they wouldn't discover until they were back on the ground. We were still ahead of the strike force, and they were still vulnerable, Deathlison said later. We had fuel and missiles and guns and bombs, and the job wasn't done yet. Lincoln Lead had seen the target and launched a missile, but it had missed. I decided we would stay. Coming around, I studied the flak pattern. It wasn't a matter of being able to avoid the flak, but of finding the least intense areas. As they came around for a second run, the main strike force finally arrived overhead and started dropping on the steel mill, and that's when two MiG-21s dropped in behind Deathlison and Bell. Deathlison had a choice most pilots never get: keep his eyes on the SAM site he was lining up, or break off to defend himself. He held his line, fired his Shrike missile at the exact moment one of the MiGs launched at him, then broke hard and dove straight into the flak field below. I broke to the right, down through the flak, he said. I figured that would give me the best chance of evading both the heat-seeking missiles and the MiG guns. Didn't think the MiGs would want to follow me through that stuff. They didn't. It was a calculated bet, and it paid off. The North Vietnamese fighter pilots weren't willing to follow an American jet down into their own gunner's kill zone, so the MiGs peeled away. But diving into flak to escape a heat-seeking missile means diving into flak, and Deathlison took several more hits from 57mm guns on the way through. His engine held. His controls held. Bell on his wing wasn't so lucky. My right wing had been damaged, he said afterward. The right leading edge flap was blown down, forcing the airplane into a left turn because of added lift from the right wing. I was able to hold the wings level with cross controls, but it added a difficult complication. I had to settle for cross controls and hope for turns to the left. He flew the rest of the mission fighting his own airplane just to hold formation, because his flight leader wasn't done yet. And Deathlison wasn't done. He could hear the strike force calling their withdrawal over the radio, every other American aircraft turning for home, and he stayed anyway. I could hear the strike force withdrawing, he said. I had permission to stay there after they left. That steel mill with the related industry was a big target, too big to knock out with one strike. I knew those fighter bombers would be back tomorrow. Same route, right over this area. My aircraft was working well enough to be effective. With the weather the way it was that day, I knew we would never have a better chance. So I made up my mind to stay until I got that SAM site, or they got me. If the site was still standing when the strike force came back, more of his fellow pilots were going to fly into the exact gauntlet he was sitting in right now. He decided the site died today, on his terms, or it didn't die at all. On the next run, he spotted a second SAM site dead ahead, fired his last Shrike, and watched the radar go dark. Bell dropped his bombs on it from an awkward angle, fighting his crippled flight controls the entire way down. Then Deathlison and Gilroy went hunting for the first site, the one that had killed Lincoln Lead, found the radar van through the haze, and released their cluster bombs directly onto it as they roared past at treetop height. He hauled the jet around, came back a final time, and raked the position with 20mm cannon fire until secondary explosions started tearing through what was left of it. Only then, after 5 separate passes, after 10 full minutes lingering over a target most pilots wouldn't cross twice, did he finally turn for home. He was low on fuel and too far from Tockley to make it, so he found the nearest forward airstrip and put his battered, bullet-riddled Thunder Chief down in one piece. Deathlison finished his 100-mission combat tour 2 months later and rotated home to become a flight instructor at Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma. That's where he was standing, in front of a classroom of student pilots, when word reached him that his wing had nominated him for the Medal of Honor, and that the nomination had gone all the way through. The men who investigated the mission afterward found something almost as remarkable as the mission itself. Deathlison wouldn't talk it up. The officer sent to document what happened at Tai Nguyen later said he had to drag the details out of him, because Detlefsen kept describing 5 passes through the most lethal airspace in North Vietnam as though it were just another day at the office. I had to drag it out of them. What struck him most wasn't a single moment of heroics. It was how precisely the two men had worked as one through all 10 minutes of it. Without Mike Gilroy's instant inputs, he said, there'd not have been the timing there for even the first pass, much less the other 4. On February 1st, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson placed the Medal of Honor around his neck in a ceremony at the White House. Johnson made a point in his remarks of naming exactly what set this apart from a moment of battlefield adrenaline. He had plenty of time to think about the danger to himself, to figure the odds, even to turn away, Johnson said. But his courage was calculated. It came not from desperation, but dedication. He answered a call far beyond duty. Kevin Gilroy received the Air Force Cross for his work in the back seat. Kenneth Bell, who'd fought a broken airplane through the same fire without ever breaking formation, received the Silver Star. Detlefsen became only the 3rd airman out of just 12 who would receive it during the entire Vietnam War to be awarded the Medal of Honor. By the time the ceremony took place, the mission had already done its work. Airstrikes kept coming back to Thanh Nguyen for another month and a half, and by the end of April, the plant that had produced nearly half of North Vietnam's steel was out of business. It had cost 6 American aircraft to get there. Everson's F-105, 2 F-4s from Udon lost the same day, and 3 more Tockley jets shot down the day after. The men flying that route in the days that followed never knew Detlefsen's name, most of them. They just knew the SAM site that had been waiting for them wasn't there anymore. He never really let the story get bigger than the man. When Airman magazine interviewed him the following year, he described the whole mission in the flattest terms he could find. I didn't consider the mission extraordinary, he said. I had been up that way before, and I knew what to expect. I expected to get shot at a lot, and they shot at me a lot. I expected MiGs to be airborne and SAMs to be launched, and these things did occur. All I did was the job I was sent to do. He went on to Air War College at Maxwell, then spent time on the faculty at the Army War College in Pennsylvania, then ran operations for the SR-71 Blackbird Wing at Beale Air Force Base in California and the B-52 Wing at Dyce Air Force Base in Texas. 2 of the most demanding flying jobs the Air Force had, handed to a man everyone trusted without question. He retired from the Air Force in 1977 as a full colonel, settled in Fort Worth, and spent his last working years running a small home medical equipment company. A quiet, unremarkable second act for a man most people would have let define the rest of his life by one afternoon over North Vietnam. He died of natural causes on December 14, 1987, at 53 years old, and was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His son, Jeff, put it simply years later. He always just felt that he had a job to do and did it the best he could. I don't think he ever thought of himself as anything special. When we talked about his Medal of Honor mission, he would kind of laugh and say it was just a routine mission. He always said there were other missions that were really tough. Maybe that's the truest measure of what happened that day over Thanh Nguyen. He didn't stay in that sky because he thought it was extraordinary. He stayed because he'd already decided, long before anyone pinned a medal to his chest, that the job wasn't finished, and that somebody else was going to fly that route tomorrow. I'm Dave. Thanks for watching. If this kind of history matters to you, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me what part of the story surprised you most. And I'll see you in the next one.
Oh, Dave.